Imagine standing on the walls of the most sacred city in the ancient world, watching as the largest army ever assembled bears down upon you. The year is 70 AD, and Jerusalem, the jewel of Judea, the heart of Jewish faith, is about to face a cataclysm so complete, so devastating, that its echoes still reverberate through history 2,000 years later. This is the story of how Rome destroyed not just a city, but an entire way of life, and how one of humanity's most magnificent temples was reduced to ash and memory in a conflict that would reshape the spiritual landscape of the world forever. The road to Jerusalem's destruction didn't begin with Roman legions at the gates. It began with something far more dangerous: hope. Hope for freedom. Hope for independence. Hope that after centuries of foreign domination, the Jewish people could finally break free from the empire that ruled their land with an iron fist. For decades, tension had been building in Judea like pressure in a volcano. The Roman governors were often corrupt, brutal, and deliberately provocative. They taxed the people mercilessly, disrespected Jewish customs, and treated the land as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. By 66 AD, that volcano finally erupted. What started as a protest against Roman injustice in Caesarea quickly spread like wildfire throughout Judea. The Jewish revolt had begun, and with it came a brief, intoxicating taste of victory. Roman garrisons were overwhelmed, local governors fled, and for a moment, just a moment, it seemed like the impossible might actually happen. But Rome doesn't forgive rebellion. Rome doesn't forget. And Rome certainly doesn't lose without making an example that will echo through the ages. When news of the Jewish revolt reached Emperor Nero in Rome, the response was swift and brutal. He dispatched Vespasian, one of the empire's most experienced generals, along with his son Titus and 4 full legions, roughly 60,000 of the most disciplined, most lethal fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were men who had conquered Britain, subdued Gaul, and crushed revolts across 3 continents. They moved with the mechanical precision of a machine designed for one purpose only: absolute domination. City by city, town by town, Vespasian's legions swept through Galilee and Judea, leaving devastation in their wake. Resistance was met with crucifixions that lined the roads like grotesque signposts. By 68 AD, most of Judea had fallen, and the rebels knew their last stand would have to be in Jerusalem itself. Then something unexpected happened. Nero died, and Rome plunged into chaos. The year of the 4 emperors saw the empire nearly tear itself apart as generals fought for the throne. Vespasian himself would claim the purple, becoming emperor and leaving his son Titus to finish what they had started. For Jerusalem, this brief respite was both a blessing and a curse. It gave them time to prepare, to fortify, to gather supplies, but it also gave them time to fracture. While Rome was unified in purpose despite its political turmoil, Jerusalem descended into civil war. 3 rival factions emerged within the city walls, each led by charismatic leaders who believed they alone could save their people. They fought each other over food stores, territory, and control of the temple itself. They burned each other's supplies in petty power struggles. They killed fellow Jews while the Roman legions regrouped and prepared for the final assault. It's one of history's cruelest ironies: Jerusalem was destroying itself from within before Rome even arrived at the gates. By the spring of 70 AD, Titus was ready. He marched on Jerusalem with 4 legions, auxiliary units, and siege equipment that represented the pinnacle of Roman military engineering. As the legions approached, pilgrims from across the Jewish diaspora were streaming into Jerusalem for Passover, swelling the city's population to perhaps 1 million souls. They came to celebrate liberation from ancient bondage in Egypt, never imagining they were walking into a trap that would become their tomb. Titus saw the city's defenses and understood immediately that this would not be a quick victory. Jerusalem sat on elevated terrain, surrounded by 3 massive walls that had been strengthened over centuries. The inner wall protected the Temple Mount itself, the holiest site in Judaism, where the Second Temple stood in gleaming white stone and gold, visible for miles, a monument to faith and architectural genius that rivaled anything Rome had built. Titus made his intentions clear: surrender now, or face annihilation. The city's defenders, despite their internal divisions, found unity in one thing: they would never surrender the temple. They would fight to the last man, woman, and child before they let Rome defile the house of God. The siege began with Rome doing what Rome did best: systematic, patient, methodical destruction. Titus ordered his men to cut down every tree for miles around Jerusalem to build siege engines, creating a desolate wasteland around the city. Massive siege towers rose like wooden mountains, each one capable of bringing hundreds of soldiers level with the walls. Battering rams pounded against stone day and night, their rhythmic thunder becoming the city's heartbeat. Catapults hurled stones the size of millstones into the crowded streets, crushing buildings and people alike. The Romans built earthwork ramps that climbed toward the walls, each one costing weeks of backbreaking labor and countless lives as defenders rained down arrows, stones, and burning pitch. But Rome had resources that seemed limitless, while Jerusalem had only courage and conviction, noble qualities, but they don't feed starving children or heal wounds. Inside the walls, conditions deteriorated with horrifying speed. The city that had once been divided by rival factions now united in suffering. Food supplies that might have lasted months had been destroyed in the earlier infighting. Water was scarce. Disease spread through the packed streets like wildfire. People began eating leather, grass, anything that might fill their stomachs. The historian Josephus, who witnessed the siege firsthand, recorded accounts so disturbing that readers have questioned them for 2 millennia, stories of parents resorting to unspeakable acts of desperation, of the wealthy offering fortunes for a handful of grain, of bodies piling up in the streets because there was no strength left to bury them. Yet through it all, the defenders fought with a ferocity born of absolute conviction. They believed God would not allow his temple to fall. They believed that miracles were still possible. They believed that suffering itself might be the price of redemption. After several brutal months, the Romans finally breached the outer wall, then the second wall, pushing the defenders back toward the Temple Mount itself. Every step forward cost Roman blood. Every street became a battlefield. Every house became a fortress. The Jewish fighters used guerrilla tactics, emerging from tunnels and hidden passages to strike at Roman formations before disappearing into the urban maze. They had nothing left to lose, which made them the most dangerous kind of enemy. Titus himself was impressed by their courage and reportedly tried multiple times to negotiate a surrender that would spare the temple. But the defenders knew that Roman mercy was selective and temporary. They had seen what happened to other rebel cities. They knew that even if Titus kept his word, Rome would eventually exact revenge. So they chose to make their stand where it mattered most, at the temple itself. By late summer, the Roman legions had pushed into the temple courtyard. What happened next remains one of history's most debated moments. According to some accounts, Titus ordered his men to spare the temple, recognizing its cultural and religious significance. According to others, he saw it as the heart of Jewish resistance and wanted it destroyed. What we know for certain is that during the fierce fighting in the temple complex, fire broke out. Whether it was started deliberately by a Roman soldier, accidentally during combat, or even by desperate defenders trying to deny Rome their most sacred space, we'll never know. But once the flames took hold, there was no stopping them. The gold that decorated the temple melted in the intense heat, running down between the stones. The tapestries that had taken generations to create burned in minutes. The smell of burning cedar and flesh filled the air for miles. Jews who had taken refuge inside the temple perished by the thousands. Priests who had devoted their lives to serving God died defending his house. The building that had stood as a testament to faith, to survival, to the covenant between God and his people, was reduced to a smoking ruin in a matter of hours. The destruction of the temple wasn't just a military victory, it was a spiritual catastrophe that reverberated far beyond the walls of Jerusalem. For Jews, the temple was the center of religious life, the only place where certain sacrifices could be made, where the presence of God was believed to dwell most intensely on earth. Its destruction meant the end of temple-based worship, forcing Judaism to transform itself completely or risk extinction. In a remarkable display of resilience and adaptation, Jewish scholars and leaders would eventually rebuild their faith around Torah study, prayer, and community rather than temple sacrifice. But in that moment, as the flames consumed the second temple, it must have felt like the end of the world itself. The Romans weren't finished. They hunted down survivors throughout the city with brutal efficiency. Those who weren't killed were enslaved. Hundreds of thousands marched off in chains to labor in Roman mines, build Roman monuments, or die in Roman arenas. The strongest and most handsome were saved for Titus's triumph parade in Rome, where they would be displayed as trophies before being executed or enslaved. The city itself was systematically demolished. Buildings were torn down. Walls were leveled. Titus wanted Jerusalem to serve as a permanent reminder of what happens when you challenge Rome. He largely succeeded. Parts of the city would remain in ruins for decades. The treasures of the temple, including the sacred golden menorah, were paraded through Rome and later depicted on the Arch of Titus, where they remain carved in stone to this day, a permanent memorial to Jerusalem's fall. The numbers are staggering and almost incomprehensible. Josephus claims that over 1 million people died during the siege, though modern historians debate this figure. What's undeniable is that the population of Judea was decimated. An entire generation was lost. The social, economic, and religious infrastructure of Jewish life in the land of Israel was shattered. Those who survived were forever marked by the trauma. The psychological impact of the temple's destruction rippled through generations, becoming embedded in Jewish memory and tradition. To this day, the 9th of Av, the day the temple burned, is commemorated as a day of mourning in the Jewish calendar, connecting modern Jews to an event that happened 2,000 years ago. But here's what makes this story transcend the boundaries of ancient history. The siege of Jerusalem wasn't just about one city or one people. It represents something universal about human nature, about power, about faith, and about the terrible price of conviction. The Romans believed they were bringing order and civilization to a rebellious province. The Jews believed they were defending their right to exist, to worship, to be free. Both sides were absolutely convinced of their righteousness. Both sides fought with everything they had. And the result was a catastrophe that neither side truly wanted, but neither side could prevent once the machinery of conflict was set in motion. The destruction of the Second Temple changed the course of history in ways that are still unfolding. It scattered the Jewish people across the Roman Empire and beyond, beginning a diaspora that would last for centuries. It forced Judaism to evolve, to become portable, to survive without a physical center. It influenced the development of early Christianity, which was just beginning to separate itself from its Jewish roots. The fall of Jerusalem became a powerful symbol in Christian thought, interpreted as divine judgment and incorporated into theological frameworks that would shape Western civilization. The ruins of the Temple Mount would later become sacred to Islam as well, making it one of the most contested pieces of real estate in human history. 3 of the world's major religions all trace part of their identity back to that hilltop in Jerusalem where Titus's legions once fought and a magnificent temple once stood. Standing here at the end of this story, you have to wonder about the nature of monuments and memory. The Second Temple was built to last forever, constructed with stones so massive that engineers today marvel at how they were moved. It was decorated with gold and precious materials, designed to inspire awe and demonstrate permanence. Yet it burned in a single day. Rome built an empire that seemed eternal, with legions that appeared invincible and infrastructure that still stands in parts of Europe and the Middle East. Yet Rome itself fell, its power scattered, its language transformed, its empire divided and conquered in turn. What endured wasn't the stone or the gold or the military might, it was the stories. The memories, the lessons learned and the meaning found in suffering. The Jewish people rebuilt their faith without a temple. The Romans are remembered not for their eternal empire but for what they destroyed and what they created. And we, millennia later, are still trying to understand what it all means. The Siege of Jerusalem teaches us that the most powerful forces in human history aren't always the ones with the most soldiers or the biggest walls. Sometimes the most powerful forces are the ideas people are willing to die for, the faiths they refuse to abandon, and the memories they choose to preserve. When the last stone fell from the Temple Mount, when the last ember cooled in the ruins, something ended, but something else began. A new chapter in the story of human resilience, of spiritual survival, of the refusal to let conquest mean the end. And that story, unlike the temple itself, has proven truly indestructible,